All right, this is just for my small group. This is Managing God's Money, Chapter 2. This will only be up on my YouTube channel temporarily, so here it goes. And I know I'm going to make mistakes, so just bear with me. Chapter 2, Ownership, It All Belongs to God. A distraught man frantically rode his horse up to John Wesley, shouting, "Mr. Wesley, Mr. Wesley, something terrible has happened. Your house is burned to the ground." Weighing the news for the moment, Wesley replied, "No, the Lord's house burned to the ground. That means one less responsibility for me." We might say, get real, but Wesley's reaction didn't stem from a denial of reality. Rather, it sprang from life's most basic reality, that God is the owner of all things, and we are simply his stewards. Jerry Caven had a successful restaurant chain, 2 banks, a ranch, a farm, and several real estate ventures. At age 59, he was searching for a nice lakeside retirement home, but the owner had other plans. "God let us put our money and time overseas," Jerry says. "It's been exciting. Before we gave token amounts, now we put substantial money into missions. We often go to India." What changed the Cavens' attitude towards giving? It was realized God's ownership, Jerry explains. Once we understood that we were giving away God's money to do God's work, we discovered peace and joy we had never had back when we thought it was our money. John Wesley and John Caven had something in common that all of us need to cultivate: a life-changing understanding of God's ownership and our stewardship. What is stewardship, and why is ownership foundational to it? Back in 1988, while writing the first version of my book, Money, Possessions, and Eternity, I was tempted not to use the word stewardship. It seemed an old and dying word that conjured up images of large red thermometers on church platforms, measuring how far the churches were from paying off the mortgage. Still, I decided that stewardship was just too good a word, both biblically and historically, to abandon. I'm glad I didn't abandon the word, because in recent years it has gained new traction. Not only Christians, but also unbelievers frequently talk about stewardship of the earth and the stewardship of the environment. The foundational meaning of stewardship is found not in the secular culture, but in its biblical roots. We'll explore in the next chapter what Jesus taught in his stewardship parables. But for now, we can simply define a steward as someone an owner entrusts with the management of his assets. There can be no understanding of stewardship until there is an acute awareness of ownership. The steward cannot do his job well without clearly grasping who owns and who does not own what is entrusted to his care. Is God really the owner of it all? From the beginning to the end, Scripture emphasizes God's ownership of everything. Consider carefully the cumulative weight of these verses. "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." Psalm 24:1. "To the Lord your God belongs the heavens, even to the highest heavens, the earth and everything in it." Deuteronomy 10:14. "The land is mine, and you are but aliens in my tenants." Leviticus 25:23. Yours, O Lord, is the greatest, and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, O Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. 1 Chronicles 29:11-12. "Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me." Job 41:11. "For every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains, and the creatures of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all that is in it." Psalm 50:10-12. "The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty." Haggai 2:8. It's hard to imagine a more comprehensive declaration of absolute divine ownership of everything. Furthermore, search carefully and you won't find a single verse of Scripture that suggests God has ever surrendered his ownership to us. And if we should think, well, at least I own myself, God says, "You are not your own, you were bought at a price." 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. God doesn't own just the universe, he owns you and me. If we're his children, we are twice his, first by creation and second by redemption. Stewardship includes the divinely delegated management of our physical, mental, and spiritual lives. In the exercise of our God-given gifts and skills, our stewardship encompasses the protection of human life, caring for the young, disabled, vulnerable, and oppressed. We are stewards of our families, workplaces, communities, churches, and nations. We're caretakers of animals and the earth's environment. God has entrusted all those to us, but worthy as those causes are, managing God's money is not about stewardship in general, but about financial stewardship in particular. That itself gives us plenty to talk about. Not only does God own everything, but he grants us our money-making skills and determines how much of his wealth he will entrust us. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. Deuteronomy 8:18. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. 1 Samuel 2:7. In the financial world, a good investment manager doesn't do with his client holdings what he feels like. Why? Because he knows the assets don't belong to him. They belong to his client. God's stewards always act in the owner's best interest, consulting and listening carefully to the owner in order to understand and implement his investment priorities. Read, reread, and memorize the God is the owner passage cited at the beginning of this section. Stewardship, properly serving as God's asset managers, requires constantly living in a light of God's ownership. John Wesley, who affirmed it was God's house that had burned down, posed 4 questions to help us decide how to spend our money. Notice how the last 3 flow directly out of the first one. In spending this money, I'm acting as if I owned it, or am I acting as the Lord's trustee? What scripture passage requires me to spend this money in this way? Can I offer up this purchase as a sacrifice to the Lord? Will God reward me for the expenditure at the resurrection of the just? If we really believe God is the owner of all that has been entrusted to us, shouldn't we be regularly asking him, what do you want me to do with your money and your possessions? And shouldn't we be open to the possibility that he may want us to share large portions of his assets with those whose needs are greater than ours? How is stewardship synonymous with the Christian life? God expects us to use all these resources he's given to us to best carry out our responsibilities in furthering his kingdom. This includes caring for our families, our homes and businesses, our planet, and whatever else he entrusts to us. A steward's primary goal is to be found faithful by his master. He proves himself faithfully by wisely using his master's resources to accomplish the tasks delegated to him. 1 Corinthians 4:2. Those resources include not only money, but time, gifting, relationships, employment, and life opportunities. Seen from this perspective, stewardship isn't a narrow subcategory of the Christian life. On the contrary, stewardship is the Christian life. God's ownership of not only our money and possessions, but our time and abilities and everything else should be central in our thinking. When teaching from 1 Corinthians 6, you are not your own, you were bought at a price, I occasionally ask someone in the front row to lend me her pencil. When she hands it to me, I break it in half, throw it on the floor, crush it under my foot. The reaction of the students is shock and disbelief. What right do I have to break someone else's pencil? When I explain that it's really my pencil, which I planted before the session, everything changes. If it belongs to me, I have the right to do with it what I want. Many of our problems begin when we forget that God is the boss of the universe, but the fact he is more than the boss, he is the owner. I might resent a powerful person for taking control, but everything changes if I realize that he owns everything, and therefore he has the right to do what he chooses. As long as I hold tightly to something, I believe I own it, but when I give it away, I relinquish control, power, and prestige. When I realize that God has a claim not merely on a few dollars I might choose to throw in an offering plate, not simply on 10% or even 50%, but on 100% of my money, it's revolutionary. If I am God's money manager, I'm not God. Money isn't God. God is God. So God, money, and I are each put in our rightful place. Not only does God own everything, God controls everything. The implications are enormous. I can resign my self-appointed role as God. I don't have to try to control everything, which never worked out well, come to think of it. The universe is in better hands than mine. and even when God has placed in my hands, remains his, not mine. God's ownership and sovereignty offer a life-changing and free perspective when the house is robbed or burns to the ground, or the car is totaled, or the laptop computer is stolen, or the diagnosis is terminal cancer. When we come to Christ, God puts all his resources at our disposal. He also expects us to put all our resources at his disposal. That is what stewardship is all about. If we believe God is the owner of all that has been entrusted to us,